I am delighted to interview Sperry Andrews today in San Francisco. Sperry, you are the director and founder of the Human Connection Institute. You've worked extensively in the field of consciousness for over 30 years?
Almost 40 now.
Wow, that is incredible. Almost 40 years of experience. And I know that you worked very closely with Dr. William Braud, an experimental psychologist, so I want to hear more about that. And also I know that you sit on the advisory board for the Lifeboat Foundation. So I'm going to start there. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, the Lifeboat Foundation has over 2,000 scientists from all the disciplines, and their focus is on how we can save humanity from destroying itself.
Strong words.
Yes.
Do you think that we are actually destroying ourselves right now and our planet?
Well, we are consciousness, but we are collectively unconscious, and that creates a tremendous amount of unnecessary, tension that is helping us to wake up. Suffering gets our attention, and hopefully, if we realize that we don't need to suffer as a species, then that will help us wake up.
Carl Jung talks about a collective shadow. If we have a collective subconscious that is calling us to bring the light of consciousness to heal it going on right now, do you think we're actually sitting at a collective crisis point or nervous breakdown?
Yes, I'd say that this is absolutely a very essential what's happening right now. It's pivotal that there is this global consciousness. People are very well of globalization and all the implications of that. And that, if we don't learn how to wake up and work together as a 7.5 billion people, then it's only going to get quite a bit worse. So Eric Klein, who started the Lifeboat Foundation, recognizes that collective consciousness is an essential step and is supportive of that. And I was just invited to his wedding in Reno, Nevada last weekend. And so there's a lovely feeling of connection and interest and understanding of our potential as a species to share a commonly sensed consciousness consciously and instead of so unconsciously.
Yes. Do you think there is an intrinsic value to the negative charge that is occurring collectively right now? Does it serve a purpose?
Well, suffering gets our attention. So that's what we need to be sharing is undivided attention, both individually and indivisibly with one another. And so the suffering, when we realize that we don't need to be suffering, and the hard part is getting people to realize to accept and allow that suffering to be their teacher, because it's been denied, it's been cordoned off, and by allowing it to come back into the foreground and be felt and shared, because much of the wounding is interpersonal and societal, cultural. And we've seen a lot of that in Rwanda and Yugoslavia and so forth. It's what's going on in the United States today and the tension between countries right now is, how do we trust each other if we can't mutually understand how to move forward together?
Yes. It feels like there's a divide and conquer agenda. Sometimes, if I look at it collectively, it seems that we're being manipulated through our negative emotions, or perhaps kept in the scarcity and lack mentality and competition. So how do we get out of that? Do you think that that's sort of an agenda that's taking place right now?
Yes, I do. I think it's natural for animals to prey on other animals, and the most powerful tend to prey on the weaker and tend to subjugate them. And that sort of narcissism or psychopathology on a grand scale is definitely been, how to stay in power for a great many, and a select few, maybe is a better way of saying it. But because we're waking up now and beginning to share a commonly sensed consciousness, it's like the herd waking up and seeing the lions with their golden hair hiding in the golden grasses. So once the herd realizes that the lions are waiting to pounce on them, then that's sort of game over for the lions.
Yes, the powers that were.
Exactly.
It seems that there is an escape agenda, and that we cannot escape, whether it's our phones or advertising when we go down the street, or even, the escape of thinking or believing that we're separated. And in that way, I believe we live in an addicted society. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Ann Wilson Schaaf, a couple of decades ago, wrote the book When Society Becomes an Addict. And, we're addicted to who we think we are and what we think we're doing, because we're brought up, even in the best of families, by being objectified as separate, as a good little girl, good little boy. And so our parents, even in being well-meaning, they think of themselves as our parents and us as something other. We're become a thing or a thought for them, even under the best of circumstances. And when we're objectified and seen as separate and comparable, that isolates us from this sense of being undivided from the whole of nature, which we come in as little babies and children, where we're wide-eyed, and how when we come across a wide-eyed little baby, they're fearless and they just are curious and thrilled and surprised to be gazing with anyone who's interested in sharing a common sense with them. And that undivided attention, when it is shared, is indistinguishable from unconditional love. When we hold a child to our heart and we feel them feeling the quality and presence of our awareness, and we feel theirs, and we feel our combined sensitivity together, there's this feeling of love. It's one and the same. So we're actually moving towards sharing undivided consciousness as a species, and that's what my work has been about, knowing that we're not divided from a very early age.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your personal experience?
Well, my maternal grandmother and grandfather committed suicide once my grandfather when I was 2, and my grandmother when I was 4, which impacted my mom, who was married. I had an older sister, a couple of years older, and so I didn't understand why she wouldn't share her grief with me, and yet I felt absolutely transparent with her. I mean, I was her little boy from 2 and 4, and later when I spent time in many bathtubs where I was staying, I would go under water and hold my breath until I couldn't hold it anymore, and experience sort of this death again, as I had when I was 4, when this tree fell on me. So I could re-access that clairvoyant unity with all that is. And I felt how my mother was depressed and anxious when I was in her womb. So this was a way for me to develop and cultivate and train the body, heart, and mind that I inherited from my parents and from my culture, to attend to this window on this union, yogic union with life. And I felt, because I yearned so much to be able to share what I had missed with my parents and my sister as well, I just took decades learning and studying and meditating and exploring experientially how to, what it would take to share this quality of consciousness with everybody and anybody. And that became the basis of my institute, is to offer that, what I discovered, and ultimately to make films and offer social media that shifted audiences and viewers into a commonly sensed intelligence.
So you're now working from a platform to further shift the consciousness of the collective. What are the best ways do you believe we can do that?
Well, it doesn't take very much. Actually, the easiest part is just to notice what we're noticed together. So if I hold up my hand like this, and I say, let's look at my hand, and we feel each other looking at the same place. It's like one-pointed meditation as an individual, but when we look at one point together, there's a sense of your awareness and my awareness uniting, such that we can feel and drop into our hearts and into the nonverbal sensory emotional awareness of our nervous system together. And there's a feeling of the heart opens, the mind naturally quietens down, if not actually becomes silent, because the mind, when it feels this stillness in which is pure intelligence, it's like all things that are available to be known and felt are available in pure awareness that isn't fragmented by thought and intention. So when we're aware of awareness in an undivided way together, we gain access to a greater field of information. And the mind loves that. That's what it's designed to do, is to try to make a conceptual map of what is sensed and felt. It's our new brain, our neocortex, that is new on the scene, and the much more mature sensory, motor, reptilian, and emotional limbic system are largely nonverbal and mediated by the right brain, and the verbal analytic left brain becomes into a collaborated synergy, and syntropy is a good word for a higher state of order, from entropy, which is the degradation of order. And we actually feel a mind, heart, and body communion, which feels so much safer and more secure and more interesting. And we can feel it and sense it and think about it in a more integrated way. And by doing it together, we feel our intelligence, two heads are better than one, so two hearts are even greater, and so we want to feel this love. That's why we share that with our beloveds, and hug and feel and adore the ones we love, because that interconnectedness is so precious and beautiful. And the whole of nature is united in that way. All bugs and leaves and creatures are all united in that same single consciousness that is deep down, in its simplicity, is actually undivided, cannot be divided against itself. So we just drop into that indivisible being that we all are, and feel and sense and love and understand what we can together.
You talked about all creatures, and it made me think of one of the words in the title of this documentary, which is sentience. Sentient beings. So you're telling me we all share a field, and that in that field we can connect and all be one indivisible entity. Is that right?
That's right, yes. And for a long time I couldn't find anybody to share that field with sensitively and consciously. So I used to do it with wild animals, with a whole herd of deer, for example. We'd be entranced together for half hour, 45 minutes times, because where I lived, there were hundreds of acres of woodlands around, and I'd come across deer very regularly, and we would just gaze we might be like 100 feet apart, but they would all be very curious about me. They'd feel safe at that distance. And I would just sort of move my head a little bit and maybe touch my face. And they would feel me doing that, because the autonomic nervous system takes about 3 to 5 seconds to receive and reflect on what is being perceived. And I could feel them, having tuned myself to be sort of telesematic. Somatically, I could feel and telepathically the pathos of what it was to be them and me. And then they would feel that and feel completely connected with and communicated with, because they're not talking. They might snort or something like that. But then the lead one would kind of, move its head and maybe look at me like this and pick up its foot very slowly and put it down again like that. And then they would feel me over the next 3 or 5 seconds receive that communication non-verbally. And we would go on like that for, as I say, for quite a while. And we became so still and so connected and communicative in that level of shared sensitivity and undivided awareness that it felt like the whole of time and space were like moving through us. So the earth was spinning through our awareness, and our bodies were just something that was happening in that awareness. And so I cultivated that as best I could because I felt that such deep, indivisible unity from my near-death experience, and that I just craved that, and that feeling of being all-loving and undivided from everyone and everything.
What a magnificent experience. Thank you for sharing that with me. You said a word, telesematic. Do you think it's important to develop our subtle senses, our intuition, in order to achieve this shift in consciousness?
I think it's the most essential and important to just be deeply feeling of ourselves and each other, and deeply seeing. It's all we've ever wanted in life, was to be deeply felt and deeply seen. That's this love that is so healing. Spontaneous remissions can happen when we are deeply felt and deeply seen. But people are afraid. They've avoided or withdrawn their attention from what is threatening and painful, and preferred, understandably, to give it to what is pleasurable and promising. And as a result, that conditioning, that habit, builds up to the point where there's so much that has been suppressed or denied and avoided, that all that which was painful and threatening builds up as subpersonalities, in some cases, inside of us. And then it gets to the point where we don't feel related to people. We don't feel like we're connecting to ourselves or to each other or to our lives, to what we're doing with our lives. And people begin to feel chronically miserable and anxious. And so the only way back is to accept and allow that suffering as our teacher, if you will, to fully feel it as sensitively and as we possibly can. And in that way, regain this capacity to be completely relaxed and unconditional about how we sense and feel, so that and that's what meditation has traditionally been about, so that we can give equal attention to what is threatening and painful and what is pleasurable and promising, without grasping or trying to avoid these equal and opposite elements of our emotions and thoughts and sensations. So we can, with undivided attention and effortless, choiceless awareness, is one way of saying it, where if we have a choice in every moment as to how to pay attention and to what to do. So if we choose to be choiceless about how we're attending, we surrender to what is happening. We can surrender to our pain and our fear and learn to love it and respect it and trust it and integrate it into our hearts and our bodies. And we can do that with groups. I've been doing it almost for 40 years with thousands of people, international. And when we're awake and aware as a group, we feel so safe and secure. We're in touch with this unconditional love of undivided attention. And then people feel very fearless about bringing to the surface what they have felt so injured and hurt about. And they find it can be healed right then and there in the presence of complete strangers. And then I've carried that work on to online, which works even better in some cases than in person.
So it's non-local? Is that what you're saying?
It is non-local. There is no separation in actual physics between any 2 points in space and time and what's called the fourth dimension of space. Einstein talked about it as time, that the whole of space was being organized in. Well, that fourth dimension of space and time is actually the observer of everything that's happening in 3 dimensions. So things are limited to the speed of light in 3 dimensions, but in the fourth dimension of space, all points, all locations in 3D across the entire universe are instantaneous. They're actually not separated by space or time, energy or matter. So we have this, we're actually shifting now, to get back to your previous question, into this ability to access this fourth dimension of consciousness. And actually that will allow us to understand ourselves and one another at a whole nother level.
I'm wondering, what do we have to deconstruct in order to get to that fourth dimensional level of awareness?
Well, we have to, face the conditioning that we ourselves created in a way by how we learned to pay attention. We actually did that, no matter what our culture or our parents modeled for us, and we repeated what they did. We tried to. It's said that the average child repeats on the average about 17 times what they see their parents do. If the parents open a door and close it, then the child wants to open the door and close it at least that amount of times in order to myelinate their neural sheaths so they can remember that as an automatic ability. So one of the things we do is we program ourselves by repeating things. By experiencing them over and over again, it becomes our automatic. And so we learn to drive a car, ride a bicycle. We want it to become automatic. So we're walking. When we learn how to walk as a toddler, all these things become automatic, so we don't have to think about what we're doing. We learn language so we can talk without having to think about what we're going to say. We, each of us individually, develop these habits by whatever was unique about us. We're a byproduct of nature, of course, and our genome, our DNA that we got from our mother and father, and the cultural habits, so forth. But nonetheless, we are this awakeness, which is imageless, that is being given to things and thoughts and activities. And by doing that, we develop habits and conditioned reflexes that becomes unconscious. And so we have to go back to re-experiencing what we've rendered unconscious, make it conscious again by being open to feeling it and sensing it as it is become programmed and habituated in us. And in that way, we can integrate our unconscious into consciousness and be free of being divided against ourselves. Because when we've made the habit of rendering some things unconscious, so they're habituated and accessible as automatic. And unless we go back and attend to what we did to ourselves, we can't really get out of this stuck place. And nobody trains us to do that. We're not taught to heal ourselves from this anxiety and this depression and greed and torpor when we just want to let go, and people drug themselves or use addiction as a way to just numb themselves because they don't want to feel the pain. So there's a lot of escapism in the world, and that happens at a cultural level, in every level it's happening. And so we've gotten to a point where we just can't go any further in that direction. I mean, when we were tribes, we shared a tribal consciousness, and we played our part in the tribe. And then we discovered over time, maybe thousands, not millions of years, that as an individual, we could be outstanding and be a hero or heroine. And maybe we didn't need to depend upon the tribe. We could go out into the wilderness and survive by ourselves. In fact, the Aborigines would send their children out into the wilderness to survive on their own and learn how to stand on their own 2 feet, or as the Australian Aborigines would do, to stand on 1 foot. And so these tribal societies develop rituals to help their up and coming teenagers to be self-sufficient, and that has led to this autonomy, or hero or heroine being able to lead, become chiefs, or distinguished in their various fields, and people would come to them for their mastery. So that's how people have trained in a positive way. But when we lost the tribal consciousness and set out to gain for ourselves as individuals all that we could get, and now we have 7.5 billion people, more or less, all trying to get what they can for themselves, we have a very dysfunctional world, and it can't continue that way. We have to take another step into a type of tribal consciousness where we have respect for civil laws that protect the individual, and we can be incomparably unique individuals, and yet have this indivisible way of being, which Carl Jung spoke of in his work, that in the process of maturation, he said, the individual ultimately learns that they're indivisible from everyone and everything. And when more of us realize that, then we have a chance of having a conscious civilization on this planet.
And that's what brings us together here today. Do you believe in the power of mass meditation?
Yes, because we're all one consciousness, and we don't have intended to notice that by carving out our separate physical and psychological territories. So to have developed the trust that we can regard with respect other cultures, other nations that we've been fighting with over territorial lines and so forth for quite some time. And the most powerful leader, like Genghis Khan or somebody, would be seen as a great leader by going and killing hundreds of thousands of people and demarcating a territory, and everybody want to live in his world, because then you're on his side and then he won't kill you. We're sort of gotten over that, and now we're realizing that as we wake up, and the expansion of the universe is the expansion of consciousness. It's actually the reuniting of space and time, energy and matter, and ultimately mind and body, that regenerates and represents us to ourselves. So we're strangers to ourselves every moment. So we know that which is changeless, this formless awakeness that is causing form to reform and be regenerated. And we can accept that which is ever fresh as ourself, and recognize and cherish the fact that we're never the same way twice together, as these different cultures and different individual psyches and so forth. This is what seems to be happening right now on the planet in a really big way. And it's getting stronger all the time. So what has happened from the very inception of this universe and the very beginning of space and time is happening now. We are rediscovering ourselves every moment, and we're realizing that what's creating us is this indivisible consciousness that is reuniting everything that we can be at the level of form and psyche. And so as that happens, we can open up our hearts, open up our minds with each other, and trust this communion, which yogis and sadhus and sages have been saying for 2,500 years of recorded history. The yoga is all the branches of yoga, bhakti, jnana, karma, and hatha yoga are all to train us to share awareness, to cultivate this capacity for undivided consciousness. So the expansion of the universe is the expansion of consciousness, and as that happens, we're beginning to notice the fact that we're making more observations per unit area of space-time. So we begin to notice the noticing, not only individually but together. And as we notice the quality and presence of how well we're paying attention together, which we're very sensitive to as human beings. I mean, if we're not being paid attention to, we feel it right away. We feel like, am I boring you, or or you don't like me, or am I, what's going on, or you feel that, and so we want to be more and more transparent because we're becoming so much more sensitive about the quality of awareness that we're sharing.
What's your definition of sentience? Would you agree with mine?
Yes, it's a beautiful word, isn't it? Sentience. It feels right, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, I agree with you completely. I feel that sentience is a form of exquisite sensitivity. And we're capable of being so utterly sensitive. I would say human evolution is about the evolution of sensitivity. And we're becoming more and more sentient in that sense. I love the quote by Mahatma Gandhi that if you can turn yourself into nothing, you can accomplish anything. And then Nisargadatta Maharaj, wisdom tells me I am nothing, and love tells me I am everything, and between the two, my life flows. And when we see that the formlessness is unbounded, it's nothing, but there's no way to divide that which is not a thing. And so when it takes form, which we have to have nothingness. How can there be a world without nothingness, right? I mean, it's the polar opposite of everything. So the no thing is this quality in what Nikola Tesla referred to this by saying that when science begins to study the non-physical, it will make more progress than it has in the last 100 years in just a few years. So the non-physical is something having had a near-death experience, and as of maybe 15 years ago, there were 10 million people reported having near-death experiences in the United States alone. These are just the ones that have been reported, so it must be probably 10 times as many as that worldwide, if not more. So it seems Ken Ring, who PhD, has been studying the near-death experience, that it seems that the near-death experience is a way in which nature, we're part of nature, is adapting by us recognizing that we're this indivisible void, this absence which is giving rise to our presence. And so when I've been working on how to explain this to the scientific community and to see how that which is void can take form as a location in space-time, as a single point. And that single point, when it's a location in space-time, then calls up these virtual equal but opposite forces, what we have come to know as gravity and electromagnetism, which are actual canceled to zero. And so the void is, its equanimity is maintained. Even the most conservative astrophysicists agree that all the forces in the universe cancel to zero. So we have this need for the non-physical in the physical. And we could say that the metaphysical is essential to the physical. And so our work now, really, in this work of this film, in Sentience, bringing an understanding of sentience to the world in whatever way we can, is about bringing this sensitivity, which is beyond anything. It's a feeling, it's a verb, it's what connects the subject and the object. And when we look at our feelings or our thinking even, or our seeing or our hearing or our tasting, it has no image. It's more of an energy. And when we focus on the verb, the activity of loving and sharing and sensing together, it takes us into this unity, this yogic union that we adore and cherish and long for to share with everyone ultimately. I mean, that's the basis of every religion, is that they say that all the mystics of all the religions all agree, and those who haven't glimpsed, who was it, Abraham Maslow said that people who have not peeked underneath the curtain and had a peek experience, they form these very rigid, sort of fundamentalist religions that then are dependent upon replicating the prophet who had an awakening in the wilderness, and the prophet did this and the prophet did this, and so everybody has to kind of do what the prophet did, but they can't do what the prophet did, like they can't do what Christ did without being burned at the stake for being sacrilegious. So, we have this whole boundaried way of going about trying to become spiritually awake and aware together.
What do you think about our emotional power being perhaps a misused or misunderstood energy source?
Well, I think part of becoming self-aware is realizing the origins of emotions in our bodies, in our hearts, in our minds. Because if we're not aware of the emergence of emotions, then they tend to control us and divert us and focus us in ways that we're not even conscious of. And then we, at that level, whatever level we are conscious, we feel pushed around, and we can tend to project that onto the other and imagine that the other person is trying to control us when we're actually trying to take control of the situation ourselves. And there's a lot of collective unconsciousness and personal unconsciousness. I think that one of the things about really waking up and smelling the roses of what we are and what nature has designed us to be is to realize that creation has created us to be an equal creator. We're here to help consciously recreate ourselves moment by moment. So the more sensitive we are to our potential to consciously recreate who and what we are individually and indivisibly together, the more lit up and turned on, the more flow we feel, the more just ecstatic we become, and we feel this serene joy of being all that we can be. And we don't know. We're completely befuddled. We don't know who we are. We are the void. So in that sense, we are imageless. We're unknowable. And when we really wake up, I feel that we realize that, and we realize that trying to define who we are is like the booby prize. We don't really need to know who we are. We're spontaneous. We're more like children, but as wise adults at the same time. So we have a lot of fun. And when all the equal and opposite emotions are felt as coexistent in this indivisible formlessness of awakeness, then these equal and opposite emotions kind of collapse into each other. And there's this sense of laughter, of equal and opposites sort of annihilating each other. And we kind of feel tickled pink and feel, this is absurd. It's funny. And my friends and I, we say the void is one of the funniest things in the world, because everything is then sensed and felt together in an undivided way. And it doesn't have to mean anything. We don't have to make meanings. We don't have to be somebody doing something. We can just be this formless, mirror-like consciousness that is receiving and reflecting, just like the mirror in our bathroom is receiving and reflecting us without judging us. We may say, oh, we've got egg on our face, or, it'd be nice if we did our hair differently or something. But, the mirror that we are is not going to judge us, and it doesn't have to mean anything. And so the individual dimensionless points, which are a derivation from the void, are like little mirrors. And right here, right now, imagine that every single point making up the geometry of space and time is like a little mirror that is receiving and reflecting, and it's going on inside of us, in every side of every atom and molecule and cell, and in you, and in everything that is inanimate in this room, out there in nature. And so there's this mirroring of being received and reflected by that which is void at every single point. Fascinating that that's actually the structure. It's a structuralist structure that underpins the actual reunification of space-time, energy and matter, mind and body, and is accelerating the expansion of this universe. There's sort of, people are wondering, well, what is dark energy? What is dark matter? It's actually the curvature of space-time into these points. And that's why there's no particles. They can't find the particles because it's just curvature. It's curved space, just like general relativity that Einstein discovered, that matter causes space to curve, and curved space shows matter how to move. And so we're actually being moved emotionally and sensorially and psychologically by this curvature that we're sensing as a field of energy and conscious intelligence. We're being guided by the universe. It's instructing us in how awake and aware and what we can do next that would help the evolution of this fantastic miracle that we're all part of together.
Sperry, you've just blown my mind. That's incredible. And you mentioned some of my favorite words: mirroring. You mentioned language earlier, and guidance, and how the universe is guiding us all the time. How can I become more awake and aware of this guidance system that is in the field, constantly in the moment to moment to moment that I'm creating?
Well, what is God or goddess? I mean, this communion of every individual dimensionless point in the whole geometry of space-time, and the synergy, the fields and curvatures and forces that arise spontaneously and continue to be reconfigured and rebalanced, so they all add up to zero. They all sum to zero overall at every given moment. That's an amazing juggling act that the universe is doing. And we feel it, each one of us. The more relaxed we are still and know God, as we've been advocated, then we sense the intelligence of the entire universe as available to us every moment. And why wouldn't people be beholden and awed by the omnipresence, all-knowingness of this universe, and call it by a name such as Yahweh or God? And the scientific mainstream today is still very much a believer that that the mind is a byproduct of our neurophysiology, whereas the cutting edge of awakened scientists, of which there are just a few handfuls at this point, as my dad used to say, our front ranks are thin, but they are fine quality. And so people like Deepak Chopra are bringing together these scientists that are, and people like myself, that realize that the neurophysiology of our brain and body is more like a television set that is receiving a signal, that the mind exists and can exist independent of the brain and body. In fact, when we die, we don't die. And that's one of the things that I experienced. And now there's over 10 million people as of 15 years ago in the US alone that have experienced this, and they're not afraid of death anymore. We realize that there is no death. We are immortal. We're uncreated as the void, and that which is indivisible cannot be divided from itself. And so we are everlasting, which is fantastic to actually sense that with our atoms and molecules and cells, together. So these reductionistic scientists like Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, who talk about us as like a meat sack. We're just a zombie that wanders around, is just all programmed. We don't, we have no sentience, we have no consciousness, and those people are just adamant. They want to do away with all these soft thinkers like us. And so there's a war going on in science, and Deepak wanted to bring $1 billion to bring consciousness to the center of the scientific research establishment, like psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, who used to be a fringe subject and now is a mainstream scientific subject. You can get funding for it from the National Institutes of Health. How conscious we are of our feelings determines the health and well-being of our gut, which produces the neurochemicals that go to our brain. The dopamine and serotonin are all produced in our intestines, which are one of the first organs to develop. And so all of these realizations are coming forward now in biology and neuroscience to upend these people who really want to be the authorities and be the father figures, to dictate who they think we are and what they think we should be doing, and that kind of what do you call them? The authority figures are really passing the way of all things. Well, we could talk about extraterrestrials if you'd like.
Oh, I love that. Let's go there.
Well, many are not apprised of the most current information about those of us who have been working side by side with extraterrestrials. I was abducted with my best friend at the time when I was 17 and had a 5-hour time loss because our memories were wiped and so forth. But I remembered the ETs looking into my eyes and noticing their consciousness being conscious of my consciousness, and there being this two-way telepathy. And when we came out of this, probably we were taken off planet because we felt like there was nobody left on the Earth when we came out of it. And we had to drive down to the gas station to find if there were any other human beings on the planet. So we had this really bonded to the sense of being off planet or something. So one of the ways that I help to train myself to be somatic in my body, telepathic and shared awareness with other people was by looking into the eyes of this extraterrestrial who was so awake and aware to my awareness. And we were just one consciousness. And I was like, wow. So I have been tuned into the extraterrestrial question for, well, it's 17 from 68 is what, 51 years or something like that. So I know many people that have been working side by side with extraterrestrials in these deep underground corporate think tanks that are, actually protected by the U.S. military. And they're ant people and lizard people and people that look like, what are that funny thing, the ones that...
Mantis.
Mantis people. But many of them look much like us. I mean, most of them actually do. We have their DNA. They've been cultivating us for over 300,000 years. We're like a petri dish little experiment to learn how to make us to tinker with our DNA to become more emotionally resilient, because they've had tremendous problems with being emotionally resilient. That's why they've been at war with the Draco reptilians for 1 million years, because they don't, they play at shape-shifting in all these different ways to get advantage with each other. And but there have been, as I understand it from multiple insiders, about 64 different extraterrestrial races that have been fiddling with our DNA for all these hundreds of thousands of years. And then they've allowed these very caustic, very brutal Draco-reptilians and there's not, all the Draco-reptilians are not brutal. Some of them are very wonderful and great people and very awakened. But the ones that are hybriding our elite class to use them it's like a hand in glove to manipulate the power elite, to some of which were descended directly from extraterrestrials that crashed here 75 or 100,000 years ago in Antarctica, when it was a tropical paradise. And they lost their technology in those wars that were going on at that time. And then they had to essentially use us tinker with us to get us up to speed so they could help to develop and redevelop these technologies so they could get back to being a spacefaring civilization. And they just wanted to kick us and shove us as slaves to serve them and use us as just expendable toys, essentially. And so there's so many different levels that have been kept secret, and we haven't learned about on a mass level, but that's beginning to break through now, and we're being informed by these very brave insiders whose lives have been threatened to have come forward, because the power elite hasn't wanted this to come forward. But now, actually, they're saying that's okay. You can talk about all that all you want, but just don't get into free energy, because that's going to uproot the oil industry and all our control over the economies and the central banking system and so forth. So some of that power elite have defected, and they have the same very powerful next-gen technologies as the power elite have, and they're going up against the 0.0001% and saying, look, we're tired of you using, sentient human beings as, and torturing people and using them as pawns. And, it's over for you. We're as powerful as you, and actually more powerful, because we have the whole of humanity behind us, and we're taking you down, and we're not going to, do anything bad to you, but we want you to wake up and get over it. So very great things are happening on the planet right now. And it's very thrilling.
We have front row seats, don't we?
Yes.